Welcome to Pivot Stories with Leonna Hatcher. I'm Leonna Hatcher, and I'm nervous and excited. This is my first episode, but I'm so grateful that you're here with me to share my journey and to share the journey of the other women who will be joining me on this podcast in future episodes. We're going to start with my story because I think it's important for me to tell my story as a reference as to why I'm doing this, because this is all a mission from the heart. I truly believe in women's ability to start over, to start fresh, and to follow their dreams and not to be dictated by societal norms. So here it is. Welcome, day one. We're going to start with my story. Like I said, I immigrated here with my parents from the island of Grenada. So starting over is not new to me. I was 7 years old when we moved from Grenada to Miami, Florida, and it was an extraordinary, extrasensory experience. The first time I'd ever heard salsa music, the first time I'd ever heard cumbia or any Latin music was driving in the backseat of my uncle's car, probably on the way home from the airport. But I remember being very, very young. And our neighbors were Cuban, and like the culture is so rich, and the only culture I had known lived in a homogeneous society like Grenada was Grenadian culture. I was in love with everything that I was experiencing, and I tell everyone that I'm part Cuban because of where I grew up. It's true, I love the food, I love the people, but more than that, the Caribbean culture that is so important to me. I got to learn a lot about Jamaican culture, a lot about Haitian culture, all of the populations in Miami and South Florida that make it so amazing and so beautiful. And so, I was 7 years old when we moved, and it changed the trajectory of my life forever. I know that my family moved because they wanted us to have better educational opportunities, us meaning my brother and I. And we certainly did that. I went to Florida Atlantic University, go Owls, and I got my bachelor's in political science because I was literally going to save the world. That was my plan. Instead, I didn't become a superhero of sorts with a cape on my back. I became a union organizer, somewhat of a superhero. And that was my first job out of college. And I worked in Ohio with Service Employees International Union. And that was an important role for me because we were organizing nurses into unions so they can get better pay, better health benefits for their families. My mom was a nurse, and she started off as a medical assistant, making very little money. So that was a very important role to me, because we were starting off with CNAs and medical assistants, and we were also organizing nurses. And I felt like I was helping women like my mom. So that was a very purposeful job for me. A lot of the women were single mothers, and they were doing it on their own. And one thing that I do know about women, especially women of color, that when our lives and the lives of the ones that we love are on the line because we're not getting paid our worth, and we know that we deserve better, once we're activated by that fundamental, knowingness or right to have free rate, better wages, nothing can stop us. Once we got the women activated, the men followed. It was pretty amazing to see, and I was in awe of their strength, and they inspired me every day to keep going. After that role, I eventually went into corporate, and I spent the remainder of my time in corporate. I mean, I tried to go back to school to get my master's degree, and I taught preschool while I was doing that, and so there was always something else I was doing on the side. But eventually, when I got into my career, I was in corporate, and I started off my first real big job in corporate, I think, was working for a financial technology company. And I was in recruiting, and I started off as a contractor, and I worked my way up to full time. And eventually I was organizing. I'm sorry, not organizing. It felt like I was organizing. I was using all my organizing skills, which is interesting that I say that. That was a Freudian slip. But the projects that I was working on were essentially getting college students from diverse backgrounds. So I would go to HBCUs, I would go to Hispanic serving organizations, colleges and universities, and also on campus, I would go to veterans organizations and first generational students offices, and all of the diversity offices to recruit students into our internship programs. It was pretty amazing. My first role at the company was recruiting for a call center, but when I got the role as a university recruiter, my goal was to focus on students of diverse background, because honestly, the organization looked very white from the top down, white male mostly, and the majority of the people that worked within the organization looked like me, were people of color, but there weren't a lot of us in human resources. There weren't a lot of us there were a lot of us in middle management, but there weren't a lot of us in C-suite or upper management, VP roles. And I thought that needed to change. And the way to change that was to hire talent from these amazing universities in order to ensure that they had the opportunity to eventually move up into these high-powered roles. And so that was my goal. Honestly, I was so burned out from that role that eventually, I left thinking that, going to nonprofit would be better serving for me. And as much as I loved the role, I felt like I was losing myself in it. And another thing that really was difficult for me was my ideas and my thoughts and my ideas and the things that I created, like, were not mine. They became the ideas of a manager that doesn't have as much experience as me. And then, take that to, higher ups, as far as like, oh, we thought of this, or I thought of this. And that was hurtful. And so one of the things that I'm still learning to not be triggered by is having been in corporate for so long, where your ideas are not your own and you're not given credit for it, is very difficult for me. And it's something that I'm working on, and something that I'm very conscious of. And so I am in the process of letting that go, but here we are. Another thing, was that I really wanted to find, a position like where I was working with people that looked like me, and we were doing amazing things. And so I thought, okay, apply for a job, apply for jobs everywhere. And then I got a phone call from a nonprofit. And I said, wow, this must be what God wants me to do, because I've been dreaming about this. God is funny, and we're gonna circle back to that moment, and then I'll tell you why I believe that moment happened for me. So I got a phone call from a recruiter, and then I interviewed for the position. They were looking for a lot of folks, and I got the job working as the director of talent acquisition for a nonprofit in South Florida. I was so excited because the person that I'll be reporting to is a Black woman. Probably the first time in my life I ever reported to a Black woman. I was so excited. Everyone that she hired under her were Black women for the most part, and there was one woman of Hispanic or Latin descent. So I was excited. I was super excited. I was like, I was telling my husband, this is it. Like, it's a nonprofit, women of color. We're gonna do this. Like, we're gonna do the damn thing. And it was difficult. It's probably the most difficult position that I ever had. Not in terms of the role, because I'd been in recruiting at that point for almost 10 years, probably, maybe around 7 or 8 years. But it was the politics, the restrictions, the inability to really be creative, inability to make change. I was hired to make change, and then I was stopped at every step of the way. Eventually, I knew that it was time to leave, but we're in a process of buying a home. And so I said, I'm gonna stick this out, because we're about to sign a dotted line. If I change jobs now, we're probably not gonna get this house. And I stuck it out, and I had a come to Jesus conversation with my manager, and she decided to let me go. And I cried, not because I wanted to keep the job, because I wanted to quit in that very conversation, but I didn't. And I tried to hold on to it because we were buying our house. And my husband was waiting right outside the door. He was listening to the conversation because he knew what I was going into this conversation. And I told him I'll probably quit. I don't know what we're going to do. But she ended up letting me go. And I think she knew I didn't want this anymore. And it wasn't working out. And I was steadfast in wanting to make the change that I was hired to do, and I was not going to let it go. So it was either I go or, they change, and, I had to go. And I know I'm not speaking in specifics because I'm trying to protect the organizations that I worked for. So, yeah, and he was waiting outside the door, and I opened the door, and I just like fell into his arms, and I started crying. I'm like, our house, our house, our house. And he said, it's okay. God did not bring us this far to let us down now. And literally, I started applying for jobs, and I literally had a interview lined up every day. My calendar was full. I got offers from Amazon, from General Mills, from Royal Caribbean, from Deloitte, from so many companies. I ended up going with Amazon, even though it was a contractor position, because they were paying me the most, and I needed that to look good on our mortgage application. Really, I was being very strategic at this point. And eventually, I got a call from Meta, from Facebook, and I started working, at Facebook. And I left the contract position at Amazon, and I took the job at Facebook. And honestly, it was called Facebook at the time. It's now Meta. But Facebook was probably one of the best jobs I'd ever had. In terms of my team, in terms of pay, I was definitely getting paid what I always thought I should get paid. In terms of resources, it was probably the best job I'd ever had. And I remember thinking to myself, I no longer want to be in recruiting, but if I had found this job at the beginning of my career, I'd probably never leave. It literally, I remember calling a friend of mine and crying because I'm like, I want to leave the corporate world, but this feels like the golden handcuffs. Why am I so sad that I've said yes to this job? It was like the wildest thing. Like, most recruiters would give anything to get to that level, and I was sad. And I remember sitting in my chair, in my little prayer, in my office was / my prayer room / my art studio / my home office. And I remember sitting in my chair, and I remember praying and just closing my eyes and meditating. And I remember hearing what sounded like a whisper say, you're only going to be here for a year. And I said, huh? Where did that come from? I said, okay. So long story short, I was working at Meta, and then I remember being in our orientation and seeing how many recruiters were hired across the country for different departments, and saying, how are they going to sustain this? Who are we? Why are so many recruiters being hired? And how are they going to pay all of us? And how are they going to pay the people that we're hiring? This doesn't make any sense to me. I had this sense of, this is not going to last. Girl, save your money. And at the time, I had that thought, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start saving. And I did. I saved a little bit, but we went on vacation. We took our first, European vacation together, my husband and I. We were having a good time. But I came back from that vacation with an even stronger conviction that I knew that we were going to get laid off, because there were also whispers of the tech bubble, the tech COVID bubble busting. And I'm like, yeah, like I felt it. So I started stashing money away the way a squirrel stashes nuts. Like, literally, I was putting a lot of money into savings and living very light. And so, and I remember telling my coworkers, especially the Black women on my team, start stashing your money away. And whether they listen or not, I don't know, but I do remember them letting us know that we are potentially going to get laid off. And we started to see articles and headlines and everything like that. And they told us that we're probably going to get laid off. my manager, my director didn't really know, but from rumblings around the company, just felt like it was happening. And, they said, eventually one day they said, if you get an, they're going to be sending out emails in the morning. Unfortunately, if you get an email, you're getting an email letting you know that you've been laid off. So I was like, okay. We chatted about it. My coworkers and I, everybody got on calls, and we were like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? But I had stashed a substantial amount of money away, and I said, I think I'll be okay. I'll be okay. Regardless of what type of severance they give us, I'll be all right. And so I went to bed, and then I got a phone call from a colleague at like 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. It was super early. And she said, I got the email. I said, well, I probably got it too. So I had my work computer next to me as I slept. Like we were just looking forward to seeing that email. Not looking forward to it, but expecting it, And I opened my laptop, and there was the email. And I said, okay. So I suddenly remembered that conversation that I was having with God, and what I felt and what I thought I heard. And I looked at the date. I got laid off quite literally the day I started, a year to the day that I started at Meta. I was only there for a year. So did I have my human moments? Did I cry? Did I have my episodes of depression around not knowing what my next step was going to be? Absolutely. But I always picked myself up with the strength of God, not by myself, with the strength of support, and I'm here. It's for me, the thing that keeps me going is knowing how burned out, how absolutely emotionally tired and spiritually tired I was with what I was doing. It wasn't the physical tiredness, because there were times when I would take time off to rest physically, but the tiredness stayed, and it was a deep tiredness to my soul. And I think a lot of it was, the reason why I felt that way was because what I was doing was not in line with what my purpose is. And I think a lot of us feel that way, but we don't know how to pivot to that purpose. And that's really why I started this podcast. Regardless of where you're at on your journey, regardless to whether or not you are working a corporate job and you're doing a side gig that's your passion on the side, or you've been laid off, or you're burnt out and you don't want to do this anymore, but you don't know where to go. My goal is to find a representation of that story so that you can be motivated and inspired by that person's story, in order to make that move and that pivot that you desire so much. I'm also here to learn, because I am still learning, and really selfishly I'm inviting women on that I want to learn from, and I hope that in the process you're inspired too. So that's my goal. My goal is to tell the stories of real women who decided, for whatever reason or not, whether they were pushed out, whether they were burned out, whether they decided to leave on their own, or they had no other option. They decided to pivot away from corporate and find whatever that purpose was, regardless of what it is. And everybody's story looks different. I know women who decided to stay at home and raise a family. I know women who decided to travel full time and leave their jobs. I know women who decided to dive deep into whatever creative talent that they had since childhood. And I know women who decided to start their own businesses. Whatever it is, I want you to be inspired by it, uplifted by it, and I hope and I pray that you find the strength and the motivation to follow whatever pivot story is yours. And that's why I'm here. I hope you enjoyed the journey. I certainly plan on it, and I'm honored that you're here with me. This is the question that I've asked myself many times over the last few years. And I want you to ask yourself as well. Are you ready for the pivot?